right, we've got Jackie in the house as well, and she's got these stylish glasses going on. And of course, we're covering the Olympics, and all kinds of great things are happening in the Olympic news. So definitely glad to hear some amazing things happening. I know that I was watching the race on the sprints yesterday and was quite impressed with Sydney McLaughlin and the race that she ran when she won the not just the medal but also set a record. So that was quite impressive watching that race. And then I was also watching diving, where we didn't do as well because Capo Bianco finished in like 10th place. So the two Chinese divers won, and the gentleman from Great Britain came in third. So definitely, we're seeing some great sports going on, and of course, there's the team competitions that are going on as well. I understand that Brazil won a very close match against Mexico. You know, a lot of times when those Latin American countries go against each other, it is intense battles and definitely a lot of nationalistic pride on the line as well. But Brazil won, and they will now play Spain because Spain had a match against Japan. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out as well. I was going to ask both Karel and Jackie their thoughts on this because as I was watching the Olympics, I was thinking about these folks that have this tremendous success in the nationals and they go off into the competition and then they don't do that well in the Olympics. I'm thinking about Capo Bianco. I'm also thinking about Mr. Springsteen's daughter, who did not even qualify for the equestrians. So, as folks that follow sports and in some cases maybe even engage in sports yourself, what do you think the reaction is of these athletes when they get to go on this national playing field and international playing field, but they don't really have the kind of success that they would like? Of course, a lot of them, as we were talking about in the past, have been watching the watch parties and seeing their friends and families supporting them. But I can also imagine that there's a lot of disappointment when you don't finish as high as you would like, but then you get encouraging words. Like I know that some of the diving commentators were encouraging Capo Bianco not to give up and to like definitely try to make it to the next Olympics and improve his forms and make it even to the ones after that. Because we do know that unfortunately the Olympics only come every 4 years in terms of competition, and the life of in terms of the career life is not that great for an athlete. I mean, a lot of these folks are considered old when they are definitely in their 30s. And in some cases, we see some exceptions. Like I saw a 40-year-old that was honored on his last dive. And I think he was competed in like 6 or 7 Olympics, but he's 41 years old. So that is definitely an old age for Olympic competitors. But I was just wondering your thoughts about the disappointment of being an Olympic athlete and not quite living up to even your own expectations, possibly.
Well, it's a success to make it to the Olympics. To become an Olympian is something that you can pride yourself on forever. You've made it to the Olympics, you're the best from your country, you are representing your nation, you get to fly your flag, and that's something to be proud of no matter the result you record. I think everyone's proud to be an Olympian, especially if it's your first Olympics, as it is for many of these younger athletes.
Right.
We're seeing even some teenagers compete who have maybe even 4 or 5 Olympics ahead of them. And
Right.
of course, that changes when you've made it to the Olympics multiple times and been eliminated in preliminary competition or not making it into contention for a medal, or even worse, to make it into contention for a medal once, twice, 3 times and not win a medal. It's disappointing because it all depends on the expectations you set for yourself. You have a first time Olympian, say 16, competing in an event. They've qualified for the first time in their career. They can run, let's say they're competing in track and field or in diving. They can have their worst performance of their life, the worst dive, the worst run, and they can still be proud of themselves because at a young age they've qualified and they know they have a bright future ahead of them to work on becoming better. Then you have those more experienced athletes who are fighting to write history. For example, one example is Simone Biles, who won 4 golds in Rio and had 1 gold missing from her set that she wanted to complete here in Tokyo, because we don't know with gymnasts, it's always iffy whether or not they'll be able to last another 3 years of intensive training, in this case 3, usually 4, and compete at the next Olympics. She needed a gold in the balance beam. She won a second consecutive bronze. So for her, well, it's a success to win an Olympic medal, of course. She's added to her collection, but it's very well known that all she wanted was gold. And to a younger athlete, inexperienced, bronze seems like the biggest achievement they could imagine. But for an athlete like Biles, or I'm thinking of other Olympic legends such as Usain Bolt, if he had in Rio, if he had not won the gold in a certain discipline, as he didn't in one, he felt disappointment because these elite athletes, they have certain standards that if they don't live up to, they are going home disappointed. Now, like I said, if you're young, you've got many years ahead of you. Chances are at the next Olympics, you'll one up yourself. If you got eliminated in the preliminary round of a competition, you'll make the semis or the final. And by your third Olympics, you can be in medal contention. So there's always hope. There's always the future. It all depends. Are you going to the next Olympics or not? That changes how you feel about an elimination.
No, I definitely agree with you, and I definitely want to bring in another one of our guests who is joined us, who has actually been there and won Olympic medals and all of that. So we're definitely looking forward to having Michelle Cameron Coulter come on and join us here as well. And as she comes on, I would love to also hear from Jackie, because one of the other things that we've had is we've had people that have been involved in the Olympics that are winning their first time Olympics. I know that Qatar actually surprised a lot of people, and you have family roots in Syria, and Qatar has won 2 medals, including a medal that they decided to share, because I was really impressed, and I've talked about that before, when the high jump competition went on and the 2 competitors tied, and then the judge came and was going to do like a jump off, and they were like, no, how about giving us 2 goals? And I thought that that was definitely in the spirit of the Olympic Games, the fact that they realized that they were equal competitors, did not want to settle for anything less than them both honoring the tradition of the Olympics and definitely having that kind of peaceful moment. And the Olympics oftentimes is talked about the fact that sometimes, no matter what's going on in the world, whether we're in the middle of a pandemic, whether sometimes these are war-torn countries, they get a chance to actually put that aside and have the spirit of competition going on in that sense. So I'd love to hear from Jackie, and then I definitely want to hear from Michelle, because Michelle has had the privilege of winning Olympic medals, and has also had her husband, who has won Olympic medals as well, winning in the volleyball. And of course, she won in what I think is called rhythmic gymnastics now, but at the time they were, rhythmic swimming, but at the time it was called synchronized, I believe, and all of that. So correct me if I am giving the title right, because I think that when I first heard of it, it was called synchronized swimming.
That's right. Yeah.
So, Jackie, if you want to make a comment about Qatar, and then we'll turn it over to Michelle as well to hear what her thoughts are about the Olympic Games and how the Olympics are going, as we're more than halfway through now.
Definitely. I thought it was a beautiful moment that in the Olympics this year, we've brought other Middle Eastern countries into the Olympics. I thought that was a really nice touch, especially with the fact that we also have a refugee team that has also participated. And the highlight that I really enjoyed was they were trying to bring awareness to the 80 million displaced people around the world today. And these team members, they are 56 athletes, and they're made up of 13 different countries, but they've all come from war-torn countries and other countries that have really limited resources, and they're not given that much attention economically, financially. And so I thought it was a really nice touch that they're able to compete and kind of bring some awareness to their countries as well. We have athletes that they are participating from a war-torn country, like from Syria. There's also a Syrian team this year as well, and we also got the chance to meet a few Syrian athletes as well, who they've also participated as well. And so it was a really beautiful moment, especially during the opening ceremonies, that the Olympic team, not only did they play under the Olympic flag, but they also walked in immediately after Greece during the opening ceremony. So I thought that was a nice touch.
No, I definitely agree. Michelle, like I said, I was glad to meet you through our good friend, Brian Shulman, and everything sometime back and all of that. But I would love to hear what your experience was being there in the Olympics, because you were an Olympic athlete. You had that experience several years back. But I'd love to hear your experience. And also, I understand from our conversation that you know some members of the current Olympic team because of some folks involved in your own family and friendship circle that are part of the coaching that goes on there in Canada. And I know, like I said, that you've been involved in swimming. Your husband was involved in the volleyball. And as you told both me and Nick, you've got family members that have followed in your footsteps, and apparently they're leaning more toward the volleyball side than they are the swimming side and all of that. But I'd love to hear your thoughts just of the Olympics 2021 and even them pulling it off in the middle of this pandemic.
Right. And thanks, Mark. No, happy to meet you all here and talk about something in the midst of a world that is looking for inspiration, just the tenacity and the grit and the resiliency of these athletes and the stories. That's the part of the games actually that I love the most, is hearing the stories of the behind the scenes. Like everyone sees the Olympics and, you know, the athletes being on the podium, but it's the stories behind and what they had to do to get there and the adversity that had to overcome, and that the results aren't always what they want them to be, even though that's everyone's goal when they get there. And to see really the resiliency that comes from that. So I'm very, very fortunate to, my games are quite some time ago, 1988, Seoul, Korea. And I talk about so much what we're capable when we get past our fears and jump in to play a bigger game than we ever thought possible. And I failed my first level of swimming 4 times, so no one would have ever guessed, let alone myself, that I would have made it to the Olympics in an aquatic sport, no less. Overcoming that fear. I've had the privilege of then, going and watching my husband play at 2 Olympic Games. And then I worked on our mission staff for Team Canada for one of our games, and then have gone and been like a cheerleader. And it's like, a cheerleader from the perspective of knowing what that pressure is like when you're at the games, and to really help bring that or support bringing that feeling of, no matter what, going out and enjoying that process, having fun in that moment, because it is totally mental. Like at that point in the game, it is 100% in the athlete's head, as it is for all of us when we come to a pinnacle part or a very difficult time or challenge in our life, how we deal with that mentally. So watching the games has been so much fun to do that with my grown kids now. I have 4 young adults who all play volleyball high level. Our oldest one was playing pro when the world stopped and came back to be in Canada with us. And to be able to sit and watch the games with them and hearing their perspective, being, still training and just hearing the inspiration, hearing what they're getting from it, hearing their thoughts when athletes are going through challenges. Like this morning, we were watching the little skateboarders. I say little because they were young, 12, 13 years old. And the young girl who was vying for the gold and wiped out. And of course, tears because you worked so hard for that. Still, you were talking, did you say it, Carell? Is that how you say your name?
Yep.
You were talking earlier about the youngins. Like, this is their first one. They're going to have more opportunities, but it was so beautiful to see. It gets me a little emotional that all the rest of the athletes gathered her up and gave her a big hug and held her up on her shoulders. Like, just that bravery and courage to step out into that field of play, no matter what it is. And it's almost when they're younger, you're a little bit less inhibited in some ways, but to see that camaraderie of the countries coming together, it's like, it's also being in Tokyo at this time when the world has been so uncertain, and to step in and even each of the athletes have had a different training regimen that they would have ever imagined going into the games. So how they adapt to adversity and find resourceful ways, and then still in that moment pull out the best that they possibly can. That is the essence of, really what the Olympics is all about. Bringing out that best in the middle of uncertainty has been really beautiful to watch.
No, I definitely agree with you. Watching that has been very beautiful. And one of the things I was going to say is that, and I alluded to it earlier, when I watched the diving competition and that 41-year-old man, which, like I said, is very old in diving, dived and actually had a very high score. I want to say it was in the high 90s and all of that. And he got definitely a lot of love from all of the country divers, not just from his own country, but from the other countries as well. And one of the things missing, and that's one of the things that the commentators mentioned, was that, there was the hope that they would be doing that in front of a large audience. But because we're in the middle of the pandemic, there isn't a large audience. But the athletes stepped up to the plate and also gave him a lot of applause as well. And I've also seen, I did not see the crash that you're talking about, but I've seen some of the crashes on the hurdles, and you've definitely seen how that has impacted a lot of the track athletes when they are, in some cases, even in the front of the race, and then they miss a hurdle and wipe out in that sense. So it's very much difficult to watch that even as a fan, because you always want them to do the best that they can do and things along those lines. Michelle, and I'm sure the other folks may have a question for you as well, but what is some of the misconceptions that you feel people may have had of both the Olympics and the Olympic movement? Because you have been involved in that movement, your husband was involved as well, but what are some of the misconceptions that you feel people may have about the Olympics that you wish was not as prominent?
That's a great question. Let me think on that. Misconceptions about the Olympics. Well, I think one of the things, and it's not about the Olympic Committee or anything like that, but just the athletes thinking that it's just that year, realizing how much work gets into them actually getting there. And there's for sure rivalry against our competitors, which brings out the best in us, but you realize that they're competing against the same people all the time, right? Like it's like constantly moving towards helping. That's where competitiveness helps us bring out the best in us. Like, so it's like when you see, yes, for sure tough when an athlete doesn't, get the results that they want, but everyone is in that same field together. They've become like almost comrades over the years to really get to know each other, that there is this camaraderie that's there, even though there's that super tense competition too. And it's almost when they're done competing that these friendships are even more so, because no one can relate to that experience as much as someone that's been on the line with you, or given so much of their life for that pursuit of excellence and been in that environment. So there's so many. I guess if you ask something specific, I'd have a view on that, but I just think that realizing that's more than that year. It's a significant.
That makes a lot of sense. I'd love to hear from everybody on this. But the other thing that we've seen happen is how even the weather can impact what's going on. Not just the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic, but I know that even some of the Olympic sailing events were postponed due to the lack of wind, because apparently you have to have a minimum wind speed of 6 knots. And apparently that was not the case because of the lack of wind. And then, of course, we've also known that there have been some severe rainstorms that have also impacted some of the races as well. So definitely that impact of the heat, of course, because definitely that has been an issue. And then there's even been some questions about some calls as well. So I'd love to hear from all of y'all the thoughts of some of the calls, because I know I was watching that volleyball game with the Canadians where the ball was first ruled out, then in, then back out again. So there've been some of those kind of calls as well, but just some of the things that are impacting what folks are seeing. And I was wondering y'all's thoughts about some of the things that I just brought up, particularly like the weather. And like some folks have said, the heat has been no joke from what folks are saying over there in Tokyo.
Well, it's a good thing that, Miss Cameron Coulter would surely know, but the sports that are played indoors, such as artistic swimming or volleyball or handball, basketball, aren't impacted as much by these heat waves or these storms. They keep competing even as the Olympic Village might be silenced, even as thousands of athletes might be stranded waiting for the minute that they're told that it's time to go out and compete, that their competitions have been rescheduled. They're continuing to compete. So that's got to influence them mentally, that while all of their countrymen and women are in the village waiting for news of when they get to go out and fight for medals, they continue to compete. They have to stay focused. They have to block out anything that's happening in the outside world and put on a performance. And it's fascinating to see. And you mentioned human error, bad calls across. You specifically mentioned the volleyball event. Right. That's a part of sport, but you've got to imagine, even with modern technology, in volleyball and basketball with these video reviews, and in association football or soccer. We see these video reviews, this technology, so-called challenges in volleyball and tennis that are fighting to stop human error, make it less of an issue. But then you have sports like gymnastics, or as we mentioned, artistic swimming, which is literally down to a set of judges where one opinion can decide whether or not you win a medal. And that's got to be a horrible change. That's got to be a punch to the gut when you realize that because one judge didn't agree with a certain aspect of your performance, one judge didn't like what they saw, you have been robbed of a medal. And I'm sure that Miss Cameron Coulter can tell us more about that. There's certainly been moments in your career where you felt that a decision gone wrong cost you and a reward that you've been seeking for years.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a beautiful and very powerful point. And that's when you're in a judge sport, that in order to let go of the things that are out of your control and focus on what you know and what you do, that is the unknown element. Like that is the challenge of being in a judge sport. So yeah, that's always going to be there. That's always
going to be there. There's no doubt about that. One of the other things that I've always been curious about is how we do in terms of the popularity of the sport. And I know that there have been years where the Olympics have done quite well in popularity. And we were actually talking before starting this show about some of the declines we're seeing. So definitely we've got like 275 million European TV and digital viewers in the first 9 days of the Olympics. But they're saying that there's a 48% decline in the U.S. primetime viewership on NBC in the first 8 days of the games compared to 2016. And I'm thinking part of that is probably because of the time zone differences and the fact that there is a vast time zone difference. And of course, the internet is a wonderful tool, but can also kind of ruin the surprise. Because like I said, if you're really curious about what has happened, you might have already looked it up before even watching the race and all of that. So you already know what, say, Simone Biles has done or what some of the track athletes have done. But we've also seen how social media has had a positive impact as well, because I was reading about a young lady, a Chinese shooter and everything, and definitely they had a Lucky Charm on, and apparently they have had their sales going. Apparently it was a duck hairpin that they had, and they said that was their Lucky Charm, and at least one website has sold and said that they have had like 25,000 sales, it looks like. So it's 25,000 sales have gone on one website because of the Chinese shooters, Yang Quinn's, definitely, who went on and won the 2 gold medals. So folks are probably like, hey, if that's a lucky charm for her and she won 2 gold medals, maybe it'll be a lucky charm for me as well. So we're already seeing that it's impacted folks in that sense. So Jack, I know that sometimes you pay attention to media outlets and how they're doing in terms of coverage and also social media. So what is your thoughts about how some of these folks are becoming even more social media darlings and social media stars? I had mentioned yesterday how we're even seeing some of the athletes coming to their TikTok channels and even doing their own coverage on TikTok of what they've been going through.
Absolutely. I mean, since we're very, very tech savvy over here, many of the athletes, they do get a lot of good press and they get a lot of bad press. And ultimately, it also depends on like their performance, how well they're doing, of course. But I mean, something that we've seen throughout the media is sometimes like the media will kind of recreate some of the stories based upon like how like the athletes played. For an example, the reason why Simone Biles, she dropped out was because she wanted to prioritize her mental health. And that went viral all over the media outlets, all over TikTok, all over social media, because it's mind-boggling. Everyone's just like, Simone Biles, she's very well put in what she does. She's very well talented in what she does. And here she is congratulating another player who beat her as a class act, of course, but then she is prioritizing, hey, my mental health is very important to me. This is the only reason why I don't want to continue. So I think this is kind of something that many athletes really don't bring too much light on, the fact that, yes, they do need to prioritize sometimes their mental health as well. But when you're competing very highly competitive, especially with the entire world watching you, you really don't want to bring too much light to that. Because
Exactly.
you always want to give off the appearance, the image that you have everything well put together, everything's going great. but really on the inside, you feel like you're dying almost. There's too much of a mental strain and you feel like you're freaking out. And you really feel it's kind of like you versus the world. You really don't have that emotional, mental support behind you, but yourself.
It's
No, I definitely
sensationalism.
agree with you, and I just want to hear from Michelle about that as well, because, and then definitely from you as well, Kirill. But Michelle, we did hear a lot of athletes bring up this concept of mental health and the importance of mental health, and I think that we've seen it, whether it was Naomi Osaka, whether it was Simone Biles, and you competed it back in the late '80s when it wasn't as much of an issue, even though we later found out that it was an issue for many of the athletes that were dealing with even mental health back in that era and everything. So I just wondered, as an athlete, if you could talk about your thoughts about using the athletic forum to talk about some very important issues, because Simone Biles also brings up some of the things that were going on in the sense of sexual abuse and things of that nature when she talks about what she was going through as well. So definitely we've seen a lot of very important issues that have been touched on by our athletes. And I love the fact that they're speaking out, but sometimes even the Olympic Committee doesn't like what they do in terms of giving them the true ability to express themselves as much as they would like. I know there's one athlete that went out and has not done that well, was kind of like giving the Black Power salute before they go out and compete and things along that nature, or the raised fist as some people may know it as. But I was just wondering your thoughts about the importance of speaking out on these issues when you are an athlete, whether it's at the Olympic caliber or any caliber.
I think it's absolutely so wonderful to see that happening, because it is the world stage too, and to be courageous and brave enough to have those conversations that are really important to be having. There's, Jackie, to your point, you get to that high level, the pinnacle of your career, and there's for sure so much pressure on. So how you're dealing with that pressure, being able to it's kind of a double-edged sword, because when you talk about it, it's like it brings it into the forefront again in your mind, but then to have those conversations that are real, that are actually like I said earlier, 90% of it's so much in our mind when we get to that place. And if we're struggling with those things, to not be able to talk about it also backlogs that into our system. So to be able to be open, have those conversations. When I was competing, sports psychology was brand new, and if you needed a sports psychologist, you didn't have your shizzle together, right? And to realize that's part of the game. I talk openly about having an eating disorder the last 5 years I was competing, and then afterwards, and I never talked about it until about 10 years after my career, because of so much pressure and that kind of shame around it, feeling like if I had that challenge that I didn't deserve that accomplishment. But there was a lot of things that contributed to that, and it wasn't until I was able to talk about it that it let down that hold that it had, and then open up that conversation for many, many more athletes and high performance performers in any area, to be able to have those conversations, to be able to identify them. And okay, now what do we do to move forward? And unless we can talk about it, then we can't even make a plan of how do we move forward in a healthy way from there. So, my feelings for Simone, it was tough for sure for her to say that and come out at the middle of the games. And then, would she regret doing that at some point and not going for it? But when you saw and it unfolded, the challenges that she was dealing with, not vertigo, but not being able to see clearly, and to make a decision, to trust yourself in those decisions, that, she's not a first-time Olympian. She's been there before. She understands those pressures. So to have those real conversations is super, super powerful. And to bring light onto not just that conversation, but the topics that are really important for us to have. I think that's the other thing that actually COVID brought out, was real conversations, the real things that are important. It's not just about win at any cost. That we're human beings. There's so many different elements that are involved, and the more that we can have these discussions, the more connected we are globally too.
The mentality shift throughout history, throughout sports history, is massive. I mean, nowadays for Simone Biles, even now, because of the huge media coverage that she's getting, she couldn't come out and say exactly what it was that she was struggling with. There was still so many holes to fill, so many speculations, so many theories, because that's the detriment of having all eyes on you, that you cannot say how you feel. You cannot say what's going through your mind. You can't say what you're experiencing. And that wasn't her case. Just today we discovered, like you mentioned, that the so-called, in gymnastics jargon, twisties, where you suffer from disorientation and you cannot find yourself in the air, to so to speak. That was just a speculation. Technically, she's never said that. Today she says that the reason she pulled out for the first time talking about it is that her aunt had died during the events. That's why she pulled out for 2 or 3 days. She couldn't recover emotionally from that trauma, and because of the media coverage that she would get, anyone who opens Instagram or Facebook is going to see Simone Biles' aunt has died. That would be horrible for her to experience. She can't say that to the press. She can't come out and say why she pulled out. She has to obscure to say it's a general mental health issue, not go into specifics, and avoid mentioning that. Now, even so, she's able to speak her mind more than athletes would 30 or 40 years ago. And in your case, as you said, you suffered with an eating disorder for a large chunk of your career. To think that you can't talk about that because you'd be ruled out as crazy or incapable of competing, stuff like that. You had to put all that aside to compete. You still managed to compete because despite the fact that you can't speak your mind, you can't say how you feel truly. And to win gold in 1988, surely after years of hardship and having to, as every athlete did at the time, staying quiet, only talking about sports and only talking about their events, what the next step is in the training process. How does it all come together in the moment that you win the gold medal, that you're standing on the podium with the partner you've been working with for 3 years to win that medal? It's your only goal, I'm assuming, in artistic swimming, as it is in many sports. Olympic gold is the ultimate prize. What does it mean to stand at the top of the podium, hear "Oh Canada" played across the arena? And is there a certain level to it where you're finally putting all those worries behind?
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And yeah, for sure, like it was almost a surreal feeling because you park everything, right? And you're just in the, I remember before I actually swam, because we competed last in our event, and saying to our coach, what do we need to win? Like my mind was like on the marks, and I had to just let go of that and be totally present. And because we were the last swimmers, when we swam off, we gave each other a huge hug because neither of us had verbalized it, but we knew that was our last competition and we didn't want to be finished before we were finished. But to stand on the podium and see your flag go up and hear the Canadian anthem, it was literally like every emotion going through your body at once. It was just surreal. And, for sure, it takes a while to actually even process that. And it's times like this, watching the games and just imagining what these athletes are feeling, and just, all the things that are going through their mind, and then their ability to just let it go and be in this calm zone place where you, where it just flows, right? So, it's definitely an incredible experience. And I look back and go, it just amazes me watching the athletes now, like that fortitude that it takes.
Speaking of that amazing experience, one of the other things that happens, and I was wondering, everybody's thoughts on this and everything, is the fact that a lot of these Olympic athletes started at a very young age, and a lot of times they are not even developed mentally enough to realize totally what they're getting into and everything along those lines. I know that I had mentioned earlier Springsteen's daughter, who was competing in the equestrian event, but she started riding horses at age 4. And I know some of these gymnasts started at like the age of like maybe even 5 or 6 or 7 or other young ages. And we've definitely seen a lot of young folks that are getting involved in these sports as well. So as one that competed, I just wondered, Michelle, if you could talk about the importance of us realizing that these are young competitors in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And yeah, absolutely. And you were talking about that when I first came on. Like I started my sport late, 13. I was 25 at the Olympics. We're seeing older athletes at the Olympics and much younger athletes at the Olympics. And every experience for them is going to be different. There's like that almost what's the word I'm looking for? Like the first experience where there's really no expectations except for this is the Olympics. Like that's massive. And then having an experience after that, then you start to bring that forward of what did I learn? But then also there's a little more pressure added on every time too, right? So it's that element of almost unknown and just going for it, and then using that experience as they get older and using it, being able to use it as leverage as opposed to pressure is big.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can definitely see that and everything. And I know you've got the adult kids, and who knows, maybe they are also in the process of eventually having kids of their own. But have you and your husband pushed them to go into the Olympics or to sports as well? Or is it something that they decided to do on their own? So what was the drive and the push for them to get involved in sports and to follow in their parents' footsteps?
I love that question because with Elle and I both being Olympians, you'd think there'd be so much pressure on them. And we know that just by, our environment. But Elle and my husband and I were both late bloomers. We were both late at our sport. Our biggest thing for our kids is that we both want them to be involved in something that they love and are active. And I remember my second youngest was in synchro. She actually did. I had a competition that I ran for 25 years, and the kids would help with the awards. And one day she's like, "Mom, how come I'm not swimming?" I said, "Well, do you really want to? Like, I want you to because you want to, not because I did." And she swam for a number of years and then switched to volleyball in grade 10 when she was going up to 35 hours a week. But her little sister went and tried out. And she wanted to try, and she goes, "Mom, Jacqueline makes it look so easy." She goes, "Is it okay if I go to the Olympics in a different sport?" And I'm like, that's coming from a 10-year-old. I'm like, oh my God, like you don't have to go to the Olympics. But even though that was our thing, we never wanted to have that pressure on them. But they just think that's what you do because we have so many friends that are athletes. But it's like our biggest thing is we just never when they go and play their sport, the thing that they get from their mom is go out and have fun. Like, did you have fun? Because the more fun they have, the better they do. My husband's, we're a great combination because, again, they all play volleyball. He's more technical. He was on the team for 13 years. He was the captain the last 5 years. But unless they ask, he gives them feedback. But it's something that comes from the inside of them, right? It's something that comes from their love and passion for the sports that they're in. For us, it was about the healthy lifestyle, the community, the friendship, the camaraderie, the learning to get through ups and downs and be resilient. To your point earlier, Carell, with the weather, the not knowing, to expect the unexpected. That is life. And so when the unexpected happens, how do you rally around that and know that no matter what, you're going to get through the other side of it somehow? So all the things from sport is what we really want them to have. And that's made their journeys through sport so, I think, really.
Well, I know we're getting ready to wrap up very shortly and everything. This has actually been an extended version. I've actually been enjoying the conversation. But one thing I was going to ask you is, Michelle, you've also written a book that deals with Napoleon Hill, the great business leader. And we're part of a book that includes other folks, including Brian Shulman, and some of the lessons that y'all learned from that. So I was wondering, the segment that you wrote, did it deal at all with the Olympics and what you learned from sports? So I'd love to know how that ties into our conversation. And the whole time that I've been having this conversation with you and Carell and Jackie, I've also been admiring the inspire button above you and everything. So I think that inspiration is always very important as well. So I'd love you to share a little bit about the book that you are part of, along with, I believe it's 32 other people, because I think it's 33 if I remember totally.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And yeah, my company is Inspiring Possibilities because I believe we all have so much incredible potential and we don't know until we jump in, make a splash, get messy, whatever it looks like. So the book, it's a series, 13 Steps to Rich is all based on Napoleon Hill and Andrew Carnegie's Think and Grow Rich. And so there's 13 principles, and this series of book, it's 13 books. And each principle, we dive into each principle. So the first one was all around desire. And both Al and I, my husband and I, did the chapter together. So we talked about desire in the sport world and beyond the sport world. So each book that comes out will deal with another one of the principles. The second one is on faith, and the next one is on auto suggestion. And so, yeah, it's the basic principles for achieving in any area of life. And it's like, I think it was 1937 the original book was written. So those principles are woven in everywhere in life that you see that has anything to do with inspiration and possibilities.
Jackie, you got any questions for Michelle before we get ready to wrap up? I know that you usually pop on and you've got some usual good questions as well. So do you have anything that's been resonating in your mind?
I think the only question I have for Miss Cameron Coulter before we wrap up today is, since you've competed in the Olympics, what was the experience like before you started to compete in whichever game that you started to play? And like, what was the mental and emotional experience you were feeling before like someone said, "All right, ready, set, go," and then you started competing? What was that experience like before you first started competing?
At the Olympics or before then?
At the Olympics.
It was very interesting. I was sharing a little bit because we competed last. I watched our main competitors, who were identical twins, swam fifth. We had this little holding room so we could see them swim in the Olympic pool. And I remember they had 4 10s out of 7 10s, and I'm like, that's a lot of 10s, And we had another holding room that was another 50-meter pool. And I remember I always jump around to kind of get my nerves out, and I didn't want my partner to know I'm nervous because we feed off of each other's energy. And right before we swam, I remember saying to my coach, like, what do we need to what points do we need? I'm going, where did that come from? And so just shaking that off, my partner and I would shake each other's hands and do a little buzz so we'd be on the same wave. And I remember going out into the pool area and going into our first pose, and I caught a set of eyes right before I swam. It was my mom in the stand of 10,000 people. And it was just this calming kind of moment. And as soon as we dove in, like, we knew our routine inside out. We trained 6 to 8 hours a day, precision. And I know what I'm doing when I'm in the water. It was everything else around it that plays with, where your mind is going. And I remember diving in the first second questioning myself, is it 1 or is it 2? And I went, just be quiet and trust and let go. So it was like there was quite a journey that my mind went through in that process, but it was when I just let go and got to just be in that moment, was that magical moment.
Wow, it sounds truly amazing and everything. You also mentioned desire and that being in the book and everything. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of desire in sports and just being the wanting to have that drive in whatever your sport is? Because definitely I know that that's what that first book deals with, and I know that you've already predicted that all 13 are going to be on the Amazon bestseller, since we know that the first one is on the Amazon bestseller. So I believe I heard you and Brian state that y'all feel that confident that all the other 12 will make it as a bestseller as well. But since the first one is about desire, can you talk a little bit about that desire element? Did Michelle freeze on me? Yeah, looks like. Oh, yeah. Did you hear me, Michelle?
So,
yeah, I hear you now.
I think I got the gist of it. Yeah, I mean, desire is really the fire from within that drives anything. It's kind of like you heard the why, like having your why. It's that deep desire that you're going to figure it out no matter what. Like that desire that's like it actually builds as you go. But it's kind of that core. It's that heart. It's that that thing that pushes through when things are tough. That it's like that unstoppable spark that starts the momentum to whatever you're going to create.
Yeah, it sounds great and everything. Karel, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, I just have one last question I have to ask. I mean, I watched the artistic swimming final replay just right before. I had no idea that you were going to be a guest on our show, first of all. And I watched artistic swimming maybe for the second, third time in my life, if I'm being honest. I was amazed. I was sitting with my family. We were watching in awe, especially at the performances of the Russians and the Chinese. I mean, the synchronization aspect is fascinating. I cannot imagine. I can't even stay underwater that long without losing my breath. And to be able to focus on moving your legs in perfect synchronization, to know exactly when to rise up. First of all, I just want to express my admiration to you and to all artistic swimmers or synchronized swimmers. And I've researched you. I know quite a lot about you, including the fact that you only met your partner, started working with your partner who you won the gold with in 1985, which is already a year after the 84 Olympics, which we always talk about that the moment one Olympics finished, all the focus is on the next 4 years and the preparation for the last for that performance, that moment that's going to earn you a medal or not. And in your case, you had a year cut off. You met the partner that you knew you were going to go to the Olympics with a year later than most people did. You had 3 years to prepare. Was your focus always on the Olympics in those 3 years? Was it hectic? What was going through your head as you competed in all these lesser events, still massively important? I know you won gold at the World Championships as well. How was it knowing that you had lost a year on all the competition?
Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
So interesting, because I never actually looked at it that way. Our first World Championships that we ever went to, Carol and I, we had swum on a team together because we had one of the best coaches in the world was in Calgary, and my who ended up being my duet partner, Carolyn, had moved out to Calgary to train here. And our first World Championships that we ever went to was in Indianapolis. It was our first year swimming together as a pair. We're quite different in height, different personalities, and our main competition was identical twins from the States who have been swimming together for 16 years as a pair, and we were swimming in their hometown. So that's when our kind of tradition started. We knew we had worked so hard. We were different. That made us unique. Our first year swimming together, no one knew what to expect. So it's how we kind of framed everything. And that's when our motto started. Just, go out there and have fun and do the best that we can. And we ended up winning our first World Championships against all odds. And so that was massive. And then how do you keep getting better? Like, it's not the big things, it's a little, minor things over time that make the difference. But I appreciate your admiration for the sport, because for so long, people like synchronized swimming, and I think it was this Olympics that they were rating the most difficult and challenging sports, and it was gymnastics and synchronized swimming were the top two of the most difficult sports out there. And our sport, crazy, because you're doing it without oxygen.
It's remarkable.
Like I don't know if we still have the record for the longest opening sequence. Our Olympic duet, our first opening sequence was 1 minute under the water, and we covered about 30 meters in that period of time. And what happens in our sport is if you hold your breath, well, not just our sport, if you hold your breath, your heart rate goes down. When you work out, your heart rate goes up. So what would happen with us, we'd wear heart rate monitors, and our heart rate would go from like 120 when you're on the side of the pool getting ready to go in because of a bit of anxiety, and it would go down to about 40 by the end of that minute, and then pop up to 180 when we took our first breath of air. So I used to actually pass out underwater. Your body goes into convulsions, and my coach would have my partner put my face back in the water so my heart rate would go back down. So it's crazy taxing on your body to do that kind of exertion without oxygen. But then, we trained over time. We would do that routine through 3 times in a row with a minute and a half rest in between and a weight belt on. So by the time you get to the Olympics, you have one chance. You go through that once, and you know that you've done that overload training mentally, physically, emotionally to then, simulate that there. But yeah, crazy, amazing sport to watch. And the training for those athletes, like they train the same workouts as speed swimmers, and then add the technical part on it, because you need that endurance, you need that strength, you need that artistic, and then the precision after that. So yeah, amazing to watch them.
No, it's truly amazing to watch and everything. And I've actually gained new respect for some other sports as well, because I've seen a couple of the matches of water polo. And like I said, I'm sitting there going like, I have a hard enough time. And I'm one of those non-swimmers in the life. My dad actually is a pretty good swimmer. And part of his becoming a swimmer is because he went through, because he was a tennis player in college, but he went through some injuries, and he's now in his early 80s. But I remember he went through some injuries and got into swimming as part of his rehab. So he still does swimming even to this day as just part of his exercise regimen. So I know that I don't swim and need to get into swimming of some sort or another. But I just had admiration when I was watching water polo, because I'm like, you're playing basically what amounts to soccer or hockey or one of those other kind of goal games, and you're also adding the swimming element as well. So that's another sport that I've had a lot of admiration for, as I've watched a couple of their matches. So we've definitely seen some sports that have gained new fans, and that's one of the other things that I love about the Olympics is we gain new fans for sports that may not always have the kind of love that they should get during the course of the regular year. and all of that. Michelle, if you're able to, and I know we still got about 4 more days of the Olympic coverage, so I will continue to send you the links. It may not be as detailed at this time, but definitely if you're able to pop in any of those days, I'm sure that me, Karel, Jackie, and of course, definitely Addie, who is also here. And like I told you before, Addie is on the Duke volleyball team. So hopefully you can even bring Al one time and he can meet Jackie, because I know Jackie is possibly talking about competing for the Nigerian national team in the Paris Olympics. So definitely we're hoping that that happens, and she's on the Duke Olympic team right now. So I just wanted to extend the invitation that if you're able to, in the next today's Wednesday, the next 4 or 5 days, I will continue to send you the links. And anytime that you are able to come on, we would love to have you to be one of our regular panelists as we cover the Olympics, if that's okay. And I'm just extending the invitation to you. And I see that Karel and Jackie are nodding. Please bring Miss Michelle back and everything.
It means a lot to us, having that added aspect of an Olympian. No, not even an Olympian, a gold medalist at the Olympics is fascinating to imagine how it must be to be watching and analyzing the Olympics from the standpoint of someone who's competed and won gold. It's a whole different take that, well, I speak for myself. I don't know about Jackie or Mark, but none of us will experience. I certainly won't. And that added take, it means a lot to us, and it's a huge honor to talk to you and to observe the Olympics with you. So we would love to have you on again.
Fabulous. Well, you guys are all wonderful, and thank you for the invitation. It's been a joy to be here with you and have some wonderful conversations.
Sounds great. So on that note, I know that Wynn's probably going like, it's only supposed to be a 30-minute show. Yeah, I've been going for about 51 minutes. And I know Jackie's probably like, I've got other work to do. And Karel over there as well, over there in Chicago. So we're getting ready to wrap everything up. But definitely great to have this conversation, and look forward to having more conversations about the Olympics as well. So definitely great to have y'all here making comments. I did just want to mention one other thing, since you know Wynn did give us those lovely fact sheets, and we did not cover. We covered most of them, but the one that we missed was the fact that there was an Olympian that won not 1 but 2 goals, and that was, and you know, it's not often that you get a double-double, and that was Elaine Thompson-Herah, the Jamaican sprinter, who won it in both the 100 meters and the 200 meters after doing that in Rio as well. So it's a double-double, winning the both events in this Olympics, but also having done it back in the Rio Games as well. So I can only imagine, and maybe Michelle can tell us about that, what the even the ability to pull that off is. Because like I said, we talked about Usain Bolt, and he was just a phenom, but apparently this young lady from Jamaica is another phenom that is able to win not 1 gold, but 2 golds in the 100, the 200, and do it in back-to-back Olympics.
Phenomenal to keep that level of training up, and yeah, absolutely phenomenal to see that.
Yep, that was a great thing to see, and all of that. So once again, we want to thank folks for catching our Olympic coverage. We will be back at 2 o'clock. Part of the reason for pushing it to 2 o'clock is because we realized that when we were doing it at 8:30, that was 6:30 for our folks that are on the western side of either Canada or the United States. So I do know that we've got some other folks that I have reached out to, including Sugar Ray Leonard's son, Ray Leonard, who may be possibly joining us as well in the not too distant future, and Fitz Kohler, who is a person that has done some endurance commentating and things of that nature, and has also done some runs of her own. So definitely looking forward to having those folks. And of course, I'm still reaching out to some other people. Had the pleasure of reaching out to Dominique Dawes, and she said that she might be willing to come on to a show or another. Whether it'll happen during the Olympic coverage or whether it'll happen after the Olympics, we'll just have to find out. But we are at least having conversations with that truly amazing gymnast that also had a great history as well, and now has a gymnast academy, I believe, in Maryland. So on that note, we're going to wrap it up. And I know that we've got that airplane that shows of the flight to Tokyo and all of that. But it has been truly a great conversation, and look forward to having at least a few more days of great conversation about the Olympics. So once again, I want to thank Michelle Cameron Coulter for joining us here on the coverage, and for our 2 young regular folks that are here as well. So Kirill, glad to see you once again. We had our conversation yesterday, and then I've had a couple of times of being on with Jackie. So Jackie, always good to see you as well. And hopefully we'll have Adi back as well, because she also gives us some great perspective as well. So, it's not just us old folks like myself in the late 50s, but it's great to get that young perspective as well. So on that note, waiting for a wind to bring up that lovely airplane and get us on out of here.